My son said, "Don't expect a dime from Dad's $92 million. At the will reading, he froze when they read my secret clause. They thought I was just a sweet, simple old lady who baked cookies and tended her garden. They thought my mind had faded along with my youth. They thought they could erase me. But they were about to find out that while I may have been quiet, I was never silent. And I had one last lesson to teach them about underestimating the woman who built the foundation they all stood upon. Before we get into the details of how it all went down, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. It's a funny thing, sharing your most private moments with the world, but it warms my old heart to know we're all connected through these stories. Go ahead and drop your city or your country in the comments and maybe let me know what time it is where you are. It's always nice to feel a little less alone. Okay, let's go back to that day, the day the vultures gathered. The scent of lilies, the flower of funerals, still clung to the air in our big Austin home, a sweet, cloying smell that I was beginning to hate. It had only been 5 days since we buried my husband, Richard. 5 days since my world had tilted on its axis. But for the rest of the family, the mourning period was officially over. It was time to feast. I stood at the foot of our grand staircase, my knuckles white as I gripped the mahogany banister Richard and I had picked out together 30 years ago. I was watching my life get carved up and claimed like spoils of a war I hadn't even known we were fighting. The house wasn't quiet with grief. It was buzzing with the low, excited hum of greed. "This one's mine!" My grandson, Kyle, a boy of 19, with his father's eyes and none of his initial kindness, shouted as he slapped a neon green sticky note onto the grandfather clock in the foyer. Richard had polished that clock by hand every single month. He then moved to the leather armchair, Richard's favorite, and slapped another sticker on it. He moved through the house not like a grieving grandson, but like a contestant on a game show, claiming prizes he hadn't earned. His sister Jessica was pointing her tablet at the living room wall, some interior design app open with virtual paint swatches and furniture placements. "We'll knock this wall down," she said to her mother, Karen, my daughter-in-law. "Create an open-concept entertainment space. It'll be perfect for parties once she's gone." Gone. They spoke of my eventual death as if it were a scheduled renovation, an inconvenience to be dealt with before the real fun could begin. My own son, Michael, stood by the fireplace, a place where Richard and I had shared countless quiet evenings, and he was smiling. He watched his children tag and claim our memories, and he nodded in approval, a glass of my husband's expensive whiskey in his hand. I must have made a sound, a small intake of breath, because Karen's sharp eyes finally landed on me. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a tight, polished thing she wore like armor. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "you shouldn't be standing there. You look so frail. Why don't you go sit down?" No one offered me a chair in the living room they were so busy redesigning. No one looked me in the eye. They just looked through me. I was a ghost in my own home, a relic of a past they were eager to demolish. But they had forgotten one crucial thing about ghosts. Sometimes they have unfinished business. Karen didn't guide me to one of the comfortable chairs in the living room they were so busy redesigning. She gestured vaguely down the hall. "We've made a more comfortable space for you," she chirped, away from all this noise. The noise was her family's gleeful chatter. The comfortable space turned out to be the small utility room off the kitchen, what we'd always called the mud room. It smelled of bleach and damp earth. In the corner, where my gardening boots used to sit, was a metal cot. It wasn't even made up with sheets, just a coarse, gray moving blanket folded on top. My heart, which I thought couldn't sink any lower, found a new bottom. This was their solution. This was my new room. They were moving their 70-year-old mother, the matriarch of this family, into a glorified closet while they divvied up her life. My suitcase was already there, placed beside the cot. Someone had gone into my bedroom, our bedroom, and packed a bag for me, not carefully, just things thrown in. On top of the suitcase sat a single framed photograph, the glass cracked in the corner. It was from our 40th anniversary. Richard's arm was around me, my hand resting on his chest, and behind us, this very house stood tall and proud. It had felt like ours then. Now it felt like theirs. Later that evening, the smell of grilling steaks wafted through the house. I could hear their laughter, the clinking of wine glasses. No one came to get me. After about an hour, Jessica appeared in the doorway, not looking at me, but at her phone. She held a paper plate with a dried-out piece of chicken and a scoop of cold potatoes. "Here," she said, setting it on a dusty shelf next to the sink. "We saved you some." She left before I could say a word. I sat on the cot, the single bare bulb overhead flickering, and stared at the plate. They were feasting on prime rib and fine wine in my dining room, at my table, while I was given scraps, served in a room with a mop bucket and a broken broom. I took a bite of the chicken. It tasted like chalk, but I swallowed it down. I had to keep my strength. I could hear their voices clearly through the door. "This house smells like mothballs and old people," Karen complained. "First thing to go is this awful wallpaper." Dad always said he built an empire, and she just made soup. Laughter erupted. The sound cut through me deeper than any knife. I built soup. Yes, I did. I built soup when my son had the flu. I built soup when his heart was broken. I built this family on a foundation of soup and warmth and care and sacrifice. Sacrifices they knew nothing about. They thought they had me all figured out, a frail old woman lost in her grief, waiting to fade away. They thought they had pushed me into the darkest corner of the house. But they didn't know that from the darkest corner, you can see everything. I nodded numbly. A part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in the son I raised, thought it made a twisted kind of sense. It was a lie, of course. A beautiful, well-crafted lie. I discovered the truth 2 days later. The house felt suffocating, and I needed to get out, just for an hour. I decided to walk to the local H-E-B, our neighborhood grocery store, to buy a few things for myself. Some decent tea, a loaf of fresh bread, maybe a small carton of the vanilla bean ice cream Richard had loved. It was a small act of rebellion, a way to feel normal again. I spent a peaceful 30 minutes wandering the aisles, the familiar sights and sounds a balm to my frayed nerves. At the checkout, I placed my items on the belt and smiled at the young cashier. The total came to $18.42. I pulled out my debit card, my own personal card from my own personal account, the one I'd had for over 40 years. I inserted the chip. The machine beeped. "Declined," the cashier said, not meeting my eyes. "Oh, that's strange," I murmured, my cheeks growing warm. "Try it again, please." She did. Again, the same sharp, definitive beep. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It says the account has been closed." Closed? My account? The blood drained from my face. It all clicked into place. Karen hadn't just closed the joint accounts. She had called the bank, used her new power of attorney, and systematically shut down my financial independence. She had cut me off. Completely. I had to leave my groceries on the counter. Every single person in that line seemed to be staring at the old woman whose card didn't work. I walked out of that store with nothing but the hot Texas sun beating down on my face and a cold, hard knot of fury in my chest. They had taken my home, my dignity, and now they had taken my ability to even buy myself a loaf of bread. Standing there on that pavement, feeling utterly humiliated and powerless, I realized this wasn't just about greed anymore. This was a campaign to utterly erase me. I have to ask you all, if you were in my shoes,
standing there in that parking lot with nothing, what would have been your very next move? Let me know in the comments. I truly want to know. Because in that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief and the shock were burned away by a clean, white-hot rage. They wanted to erase me? Fine. They had just reminded me exactly who I was before I became Mrs. Richard Vance, and that woman knew how to fight. My mind didn't go to lawyers or to arguments. It went back in time, back 15 years to a different kind of crisis. Back then, Vance Innovations wasn't the tech giant it was today. It was a struggling startup, bleeding cash, one bad quarter away from total collapse. The dot-com bubble had burst, and our dreams were bursting along with it. I remember Richard coming home every night, the confidence drained from his face, leaving behind the hollowed-out look of a man facing ruin. He'd pace the living room for hours, staring into the fireplace as if he could will our problems to burn away. "We're on the brink, Elle," he'd whispered one night, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The bank is going to call in our loans. We'll lose everything, the company, the house, all of it." There was one last hope, a potential merger with a larger firm from California. It was a lifeline, but the deal required a significant cash injection from us as a show of good faith, collateral to prove we were still solvent. It was money we simply didn't have. Richard had already leveraged everything he could. He was proud, too proud to go begging to friends or extended family. I couldn't watch him fall apart. I couldn't watch our life's work crumble to dust. So, I made a choice. He never knew the full extent of my family's assets before our marriage. My father, a shrewd man and a passionate collector, had left me one thing of immense value: his collection of rare vintage watches. It was my inheritance, my safety net, hidden away in a Swiss bank vault for years. It was my last connection to him. That night, while Richard slept, his face etched with worry even in his dreams, I sat at my desk. I made calls. I sent faxes. It took 2 days of tense, long-distance negotiations. I sold every last piece. The Patek Philippe from the 1950s, the Rolex my father wore on his wedding day. Each one was a memory. Each one was a piece of my heart. The money, a substantial 7-figure sum, was wired directly from the Swiss bank to a holding account, and from there, I transferred it into the company's main operating fund. The next morning, I found Richard staring at the company's bank balance on his computer, his face a mask of disbelief. It's here," he stammered. "The money. An anonymous investor," the bank said. "A wire from Europe." He looked at me, his eyes wide with questions he was too afraid to ask. I just poured him a cup of coffee. "Don't question a miracle, darling," I said softly, my own heart aching for the loss of my father's legacy. "Go and close your deal. Don't let them see you fall." He did. That money saved Vance Innovations. It funded the merger that turned everything around. He always referred to it as the miracle investment that came out of nowhere. He never knew the miracle was sitting across the breakfast table from him all along. And that was only the first secret I kept to save him. Saving the company from financial ruin was one thing, but a few weeks later, a new crisis emerged. The merger was complete, but now they had to prove their new vision to the world. They were planning an IPO, a public stock offering. But every proposal Richard and his team put forward was shot down by the new board members from California. They were old school, and they thought he was too. "They say my ideas are stale," he fumed one night, tossing a rejected draft onto the dining table. "They want disruptive innovation, scalable synergy. It's all just buzzwords. I don't know what they want." He was a brilliant engineer, but he wasn't a visionary storyteller. His strength was in building things, not in packaging them for Wall Street. That night, I couldn't sleep. I crept downstairs long after he had gone to bed, a cup of chamomile tea in my hand. I picked up his rejected proposal and a fresh legal pad. By the time the sun started to rise, my fingers were stained with ink, and my mind was sharp and clear for the first time in years. I knew I couldn't just hand it to him. His pride wouldn't allow it. So I typed it up, a clean, professional-looking document. I signed it with a pseudonym, E. Sinclair. It sounded anonymous, professional, masculine. I sealed it in a plain manila envelope and mailed it to his office from a post office in a different zip code. No return address. 2 days later, he came home buzzing with an energy I hadn't seen in months. "You won't believe this," he exclaimed over dinner. "Someone, some consultant, I guess, sent an anonymous proposal to the office. It's brilliant. It's everything the board has been asking for. It even feels familiar somehow." He looked at me. "The phrasing almost sounds like you." I just shrugged and kept stirring the soup. "I'm sure it's just a coincidence, dear." Now, I know what you might be thinking. Why didn't she just speak up? Why let him take the credit? You have to understand, in that world, at that time, they wouldn't have listened to a homemaker. The family, the company, it needed one hero. I chose to let that hero be him. But silence, when it's kept for too long, can curdle into regret. And they had no idea the secrets that were hiding behind my quiet smile. The final straw, the one that broke the dam of my patience, came on a bright, sunny afternoon the following week. I was in the front yard, trying to salvage the rose bushes Richard had planted for me, which the grandkids' careless trampling had nearly destroyed. That's when I saw her, Karen. She was standing on the sidewalk, talking to our neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose main hobby was collecting and spreading gossip like a bee spreads pollen. I was partially hidden by a large azalea bush, and they hadn't seen me. I paused, my gardening shears in hand. I shouldn't have listened, but I did. "And we're just so worried about her," I heard Karen say, her voice oozing a thick, syrupy concern that made my stomach turn. "Her mind just isn't what it used to be since Richard passed. It's a classic sign of dementia, you know. Just last week, she got lost on her way back from the store, and she keeps misplacing things, talking to herself. It's heartbreaking." A lie. Every word was a deliberate, venomous lie. I hadn't gotten lost. My card had been declined because of her. I wasn't talking to myself. I was grieving. We feel it's our duty to step in and manage her affairs now. For her own protection, of course. We don't want her to be taken advantage of. That's why we're handling all the finances now. It's what Richard would have wanted. Mrs. Gable clucked sympathetically, her eyes wide. "Oh, you poor dear. You and Michael are saints for taking on such a burden." A burden. That's what I was to them. A burden to be managed, a problem to be solved. Karen wasn't just trying to steal my home and my money. She was systematically destroying my reputation, poisoning my relationships with the neighbors I'd known for decades. She was building a narrative, a story that would paint her as a dutiful, caring daughter-in-law and me as a senile old woman who needed to be put away. She was laying the groundwork to justify any future actions, perhaps even having me declared legally incompetent. I shrank back behind the bush, my heart pounding with a cold, terrifying fury. This was no longer just about greed. This was psychological warfare. She was trying to gaslight me, to make me doubt my own mind, and to isolate me from anyone who could help. It was a calculated, insidious plan to strip me of everything, right down to my own sanity. I stumbled back into the house, their poisonous words echoing in my ears. The shears felt heavy in my hand. For a fleeting moment, I understood how people could be driven to madness. But I was not mad. I was focused. Karen's lies had given me the final gift I needed, the complete and utter absence of doubt. There was no more room for sentiment, no more what-ifs. There was only the path forward. It was time to burn her carefully constructed narrative to the ground with the one thing she couldn't fight, the undeniable, documented truth. That night, sleep was impossible. The whispers from the sidewalk, the humiliation at the grocery store, the sight of those neon stickers, it all swirled in my head, a toxic cocktail of grief and rage. I lay on the lumpy cot in the utility room, feeling the cold seep into my bones, and I knew I couldn't fight this alone. But who could I trust? Michael was lost to me. My old friends were being fed lies by Karen. Then I remembered. Richard. In the last year of his life, as his illness progressed, he became more reflective, more somber. He saw things. He saw the way Michael was changing, the sharp, acquisitive gleam in Karen's eye. I had dismissed it as his own fear of mortality. I was wrong. I got up, my joints aching in protest, and went to his closet. It still smelled of him, a faint scent of cedar and his old aftershave. In the back, behind a row of shoes he would never wear again, was a small metal lockbox. I'd forgotten all about it. He had given me the key years ago, telling me it was for important documents. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. Inside, nestled on top of old stock certificates and the deed to the house, was a single, thick envelope. My name, Eleanor, was written on the front in Richard's familiar, strong handwriting. Below it, he had written, "To be opened only in case of dire emergency, when you feel you are alone." This was it. This was the moment. With shaking fingers, I broke the wax seal. Inside was not a long, sentimental letter. It was a single sheet of paper with two things on it. First, a sentence. "Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means they have become the people I feared they would be. Forgive me for not being strong enough to stop it while I was here." And second, a name and a number. Mr. Arthur Davies, followed by a phone number, and below that, a small silver key taped to a page. Mr. Davies. I knew the name, of course. He was Richard's corporate lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man I'd only met a handful of times at company functions. I always assumed he was just that, the company's lawyer. The letter implied something more. The next morning, I didn't use the house phone. I walked 2 blocks to a payphone, a relic of another era, but it was private. I dialed the number. "Davies," a crisp voice answered. "Mr. Davies," I said, my own voice steadier than I expected. "I have a letter from Richard, and a key." There was a pause on the other end. It wasn't a pause of confusion, but of recognition, of waiting. "I have a letter from Richard and a key," I continued. The silence stretched for a moment longer, and then he spoke, his voice low and serious. "Mrs. Vance, I've been waiting for your call. Can you come to my office this afternoon? It's time."
Time for what? I wasn't sure. But as I hung up the phone, a sliver of hope, the first I'd felt in weeks, pierced through the despair. Richard had seen this coming, and he had left me a map. Mr. Davies's office was in a sleek glass tower downtown, the kind of place that hummed with quiet power and expensive legal fees. I felt small and out of place in my simple dress, but I held my head high. I was not there as a victim, I was there as a client. Mr. Davies greeted me not with pity, but with a firm handshake and profound respect. He was a man about my age, with kind eyes that held a sharp intelligence. He led me into a wood-paneled conference room. Richard was my client, but he was also my friend. He began after I had handed him the letter and the key. In his last months, he was deeply troubled. He saw what was happening with his family, and he felt a great deal of regret about many things.
He took the small silver key and walked over to a massive built-in bookshelf. He touched a specific book, and a section of the wall swung silently inward, revealing a hidden safe. My jaw nearly dropped. Richard had loved his secrets. Mr. Davies used the key to open a specific lockbox inside the safe, pulling out a thick, leather-bound folder. He placed it on the polished table between us. "Richard prepared this," he said. "He called it his insurance policy. He hoped you would never need it." He opened the folder, and my breath caught. It was a collection of documents meticulously organized. Bank statements, old partnership agreements, and a series of digital audio files on a USB drive. "What is this?" I whispered. Richard was a tech man. For the last year, he was testing a new voice-activated journaling software on his office computer. He intended to record his memoirs, but the software was sensitive. It didn't just record him, it recorded everything in the room. Phone calls, conversations. It captured things he wasn't even aware of at the time. My heart began to pound. We plugged the drive into a laptop. Mr. Davies clicked on the first file. The sound was crystal clear. It was Michael's voice on the phone with Karen just 3 days after the funeral. "She's still breathing? I thought she'd be gone by now." My hand flew to my mouth. File after file, it was all there. "Don't expect a dime from Dad's $92 million. Just move her to the shed. She won't know the difference. He built an empire. She just made soup." Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of validation. I wasn't going crazy. I wasn't imagining their cruelty. It was real. It was recorded. And it was damning. We had proof of their greed, their contempt, their conspiracy. Mr. Davies looked at me, his expression grim. "This is more than enough to contest any action they take. But Eleanor, Richard left one more thing." I knew we had the evidence we needed to fight back, but I had no idea that Richard had left behind another secret, a legal masterstroke hidden in plain sight that would change the entire game. "What else?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, as I wiped the tears from my cheeks. What more could there be? Mr. Davies reached into the back of the leather folder and pulled out another slimmer file. This one was sealed. "He made me promise to only open this with you, and only if you brought me that key," he said. He broke the seal. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a notarized copy of the original joint trust agreement for the Vance family estate. He pointed to a clause deep within the legal jargon, a section I had never paid attention to. It was titled the Morality Clause. It stipulated that any beneficiary who acted with malice, gross disrespect, or emotional cruelty toward his spouse, Eleanor Vance, after his passing, could have their inheritance reduced or eliminated entirely at the discretion of a third-party arbiter, happening to be Mr. Davies himself. Richard had added it 5 months before he died. Michael and Karen had never been sent the updated copy. They were operating off an old version. My head was spinning. He knew exactly what they would do. "He suspected," he corrected gently, "and he built you a shield. But Eleanor, this next part, this is the sword." He slid the second document across the table. It was my handwritten draft of the Phoenix Project, the pages yellowed with age. Next to it, he placed the official IPO filing from 15 years ago. I did some digging after Richard first spoke to me. The IPO was filed under the company's name, but the core intellectual framework, the Phoenix model itself, was so unique that it was also granted a separate patent, a patent attributed to one E. Sinclair. My heart stopped. A patent? I had never even considered that. A patent that has been generating millions of dollars in licensing fees and royalties every year for the last decade and a half. Mr. Davies continued, his voice steady. "The funds have been accumulating in a blind trust managed by this firm. Richard never touched a penny of it. He always said it didn't belong to him." He leaned forward. "Eleanor, we hired a forensic handwriting analyst. They compared your handwritten draft to the signature of E. Sinclair on the original patent application documents Richard stored here. It's a 100% match. That patent, that blind trust holding over $60 million and all its future earnings, it's all yours. It always has been. I stared at him, unable to speak. The room seemed to tilt. The soup, the cracked photo frame, the cot in the utility room, the humiliation at the grocery store, all of it swirled in my mind, juxtaposed with this revelation of a secret, waiting fortune. It wasn't just about getting the house back. It was about owning the very foundation of the empire they were so proud of. Mr. Davies let the silence sit for a moment before speaking again. The will reading is scheduled for Friday morning at 10. Are you ready to claim what is rightfully yours, Mrs. Vance? A slow, cold smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile I'd had in weeks. Oh, Arthur, call me Eleanor, and yes, I'm more than ready. And I have to take a moment here and just say thank you. Thank you for sticking with my story this far. If you're still with me on this journey, do me a favor and just type the number 1 in the comments so I know you're here. It means the world to me. Now let's talk about that Friday. Friday morning arrived with a cool Texas breeze, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to break within the 4 walls of Mr. Davies's conference room. I chose my outfit with care, a simple but elegant navy blue dress, the string of pearls Richard had given me for a 30th anniversary, and the old beige coat they had all called depressing last Christmas. Today, it felt like armor.
I walked into the conference room at exactly 10 o'clock. They were all there already. Michael, Karen, Jessica, and Kyle. They were seated around the large, polished table, looking confident and proprietary, as if they already owned the place. They were laughing amongst themselves, sipping on complimentary cappuccinos. When I entered, the laughter didn't stop. Michael just glanced at me and then looked away, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. They had saved a seat for me, of course. Not at the main table with them, but a single, hard-backed chair placed against the wall, slightly behind everyone else, as if I were a mere spectator, an afterthought at the reading of my own husband's will. I walked past it without a glance and pulled an empty plush leather chair up to the main table, directly opposite Michael. His smile faltered for a second. The room fell quiet as Mr. Davies entered, his leather briefcase clicking shut with the sound of finality. He took his seat at the head of the table and nodded gravely to us all. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice filling the room. "We are here today to execute the final will and testament of Mr. Richard Vance." He passed out copies of the will, the old version. I watched as Michael and Karen eagerly scanned the first few pages, their eyes lighting up as they read about the stock portfolios, the vacation properties, the art collection. Everything seemed to be going exactly as they had planned. "As you can see," Mr. Davies said, "Richard has left the bulk of his liquid assets and properties to his son, Michael." Michael leaned back in his chair, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He caught my eye and gave me a small dismissive shrug, as if to say, "See, I told you so." Karen reached over and squeezed his hand. Her painted lips curled into a victorious smile. They thought they had won. They thought the story was over. Mr. Davies let them savor their perceived victory for a moment longer. He let the silence hang in the air, thick with their arrogance. Then he cleared his throat. "However," he said, and the single word cut through the smugness like a knife, "there was the matter of a recently added codicil, a final addendum to the will, which supersedes certain clauses." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out not a document, but a small silver digital voice recorder. He placed it in the center of the table. Michael's brow furrowed. "What's that?" "This," Mr. Davies said, his eyes locking on to Michael's, "is Exhibit A." Was it? Mr. Davies raised an eyebrow. He laid the documents out for them to see. My handwritten draft, the forensic analyst's report, the official patent certificate. 15 years ago, he explained, an anonymous proposal, the Phoenix Project, became the blueprint for this company's success. It was patented under the pseudonym E. Sinclair. After extensive forensic analysis, we have confirmed that the author, and therefore the legal owner of that patent, is your mother. Gasps filled the room. Jessica dropped her phone on the table with a clatter. This patent, Mr. Davies continued, his voice ringing with finality, currently yields residuals and licensing fees amounting to approximately $9.4 million annually. The blind trust holding the past earnings contains, as of this morning, $62 million. It all belongs to Eleanor. The room was utterly silent. The air crackled with the sound of their shattered reality. They had spent their lives living off a legacy they thought belonged to their father, never realizing they were living off the mind of the woman they had dismissed and discarded. I stood up, pulling my old beige coat around my shoulders. It felt like a royal robe. I looked at my family, my son, a broken man, my daughter-in-law, her face a grotesque mask of fury and greed, my grandchildren, finally seeing the truth. I drew the map, I said quietly, my voice steady and clear, and you all just thought the treasure appeared by magic. Then I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them to drown in the silence. The drive home was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't the silence of oppression. It was the silence of shock. I sat in the back of the car Mr. Davies had arranged for me, while Michael and Karen sat in the front, rigid and speechless. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been completely annihilated and rebuilt from the ground up. When we arrived back at the house, my house, Mr. Davies' associate was already there, waiting at the front door. He handed Michael a legal envelope. "What's this?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse. "A formal notice," the associate said politely. "As the sole owner of this property, Mrs. Vance has requested that all non-essential occupants vacate the premises within 48 hours. Karen let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "You're kicking us out? Your own family?" "Yes," I said, walking past them and through the front door. The air inside already felt different, lighter. The next 2 days were a blur of frantic packing and furious whispers. The laughter was gone, the arrogance was gone. All that remained was the frantic, undignified scramble of rats deserting a sinking ship. They stuffed their designer clothes into suitcases and their ill-gotten gains into boxes. Michael tried to approach me once as I was sitting in the living room watching them. His face was crumpled, his eyes red. "Mom," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please, don't do this. We can talk about this." I looked up at him, this man who had been my baby boy, who I had rocked to sleep and whose scraped knees I had kissed better. I felt a pang of ancient maternal pain, but it was overshadowed by the cold, hard clarity of the truth. "We had years to talk, Michael," I replied, my voice even. "You chose what you wanted to say. The will simply listened." He flinched as if I had slapped him and retreated. Karen, however, had more fight in her. She cornered me by the kitchen, her face twisted in a snarl. "You're a heartless monster, a vindictive old witch. After everything we did for you—" "Everything you did to me, you mean," I corrected her calmly. "I gave you a home. You gave me a utility room. I gave you love. You gave me a cold plate of chicken. We are not the same, Karen. Your 48 hours are ticking away. I suggest you focus on packing." She opened her mouth to scream again, but seeing the look in my eyes, she thought better of it. She turned and stormed off. I spent those 2 days performing a quiet ritual.
I walked through my home room by room, and I gathered up their little neon flags of conquest. The green sticker on Richard's clock, the yellow one on the armchair, the pink one on my vanity. I peeled each one off, folded it neatly in half, and dropped it into a trash bag. This one's mine, they had claimed. Not anymore. It never really was. They just mistook my kindness for consent, and that was a mistake they would regret for the rest of their lives. The morning after they left, a profound silence settled over the house. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a clean silence. It was the sound of a space that could finally breathe again after being suffocated for too long. For a week, I simply existed in it. I sat in Richard's armchair. I slept in my own bed. I made myself a pot of soup. Not because it was all I could do, but because I wanted to. But the house, as peaceful as it now was, held too many ghosts, too many echoes of laughter, and too many whispers of pain. It was a beautiful chapter of my life, but that chapter was over. It was time to write a new one. That spring, I sold the big house in Austin. I didn't do it out of anger or revenge. I did it because you cannot move forward if you are constantly looking back. The sale finalized, and with the guidance of Mr. Davies, I found a new home, a sun-drenched penthouse in Santa Barbara, California, with wide windows that looked out over the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean. There were no creaky stairs, no dark corners, no lingering scent of greed, just the gentle, constant hush of the waves. It was the sound of peace. The royalties from the Phoenix Project patent continued to arrive in my bank account, a steady, quiet stream of numbers that felt more theoretical than real. I had more money than I could ever spend in a dozen lifetimes, and I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't just sit on it. That money wasn't just a reward, it was a responsibility. It was a tool. So I started something new. Mr. Davies helped me with the legal framework. We established a foundation. It didn't have a flashy name. It wasn't designed to have galas or red carpet events. I called it simply the Phoenix Fund. Its mission was simple: to find and fund the women who had been erased. The women who, like me, had been the silent partners, the ghost writers of their family's success, the wives who balanced the books, the mothers who wrote the business plans, the daughters whose brilliant ideas were claimed by fathers or brothers. We would offer scholarships for women going back to school later in life. We would provide seed grants for female entrepreneurs over the age of 50. We would give them the one thing I had craved for decades: recognition. It was the most fulfilling work of my life. Every time we funded a new project, a biotech startup from a retired chemist, a software company from a former stay-at-home mom, I felt like I was healing a small piece of my own past. I was turning my pain into someone else's power. I had spent so many years being the spine, the invisible support structure for someone else's legacy. Now, I was helping other women build legacies of their very own, out in the bright, warm sun.
My life now is quiet, but it is a rich, full quiet. It's a quiet of my own choosing. My penthouse in Santa Barbara isn't cluttered with things, but with light and air, and the few memories I chose to keep. And one of them is taped to the front of my stainless steel refrigerator. It's a child's drawing, done with crayons on faded construction paper. My grandson, Kyle, drew it for me years ago, long before his parents taught him that I was a burden, long before he learned to roll his eyes at me. It's a stick figure of me, with wild, curly hair and big round glasses, standing next to a giant glowing light bulb. Underneath, in bright purple misspelled scribble, it says, "To Grandma, you think better than Google." I almost threw it away once during those dark days after Richard died, Back when they were telling me I was losing my mind, that my memory was slipping, that I should just sit down, smile, and stay silent. I'm so glad I didn't. That little boy saw something in me that the adults, in their greed and arrogance, had chosen to forget. He saw my light. They buried me in assumptions. Old, fading, irrelevant. They tried to write the end of my story for me. But they forgot the most important rule of all. You are the only one who gets to write your own ending. And my story wasn't over. I wasn't fading. I was just waiting. Waiting for the right moment to finally think out loud. If you have ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside by the people who were supposed to love you most, please remember this. Your story is not over until you decide it is. Your worth is not determined by their opinion of you. It's determined by the fire you keep alive inside yourself. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If it moved you or reminded you of someone you know, please consider sharing it. And I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Has there ever been a time in your life when you had to fight to make your voice heard? I promise you, I read every single one. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Grandma's True Stories for more real tales of strength, justice, and the incredible women who refuse to disappear quietly. Because they might tell you that silence is golden. But let me tell you a secret I learned the hard way. Truth? Truth is priceless.